Hello, welcome back to my channel and to today's video, which was very highly requested following my most recent bag collection video. Probably because there was a huge difference between my first bag collection video back in 2017 and this most recent 2024 edition. Lots of bags have gone, and they've gone throughout the years. So today I basically wanted to go through all of the older bags since that first bag collection video and address some points as to why I no longer have them. Okay, so over the years, like most people, my style has changed, evolved, if you will. And there was a period of time where I used to love trends, and I would buy trends for the sake of them being a trend because I wanted to be in, and I also really liked experimenting. That couldn't be further away from where I am now as a consumer and just as a grown woman. I think my style evolved and my taste evolved, and maybe with age as well. I just got to a point where now I know what my style is, I know what I like, I know what I don't like, and I just don't veer away from that. So that's why I can often be a repeat purchaser of the things that I really, really love. Trends. I no longer buy trends for the sake of them being a trend. There might be items that I buy and they just so happen to be a trend, but I don't buy them for the sake of being a trend. So that leads me to my first sort of category of bags, because I've split them all up into categories. That leads me to my first category of bags that I have purchased throughout the years and no longer have. And that category is it bags. It bags for me were, I suppose I can now call it my downfall. Actually, when I look back at the amount of money that I've spent on bags that I no longer have, and I've sold most of them, it just, ugh. But of course at the time I loved them, so, you know, shoulda, woulda, coulda. So, it bags. These are bags that were very much in trend. It could have been for one season, it could have been for 2, 3, 4, but they were bags that I purchased that I absolutely loved at the time. But regardless of that, they do fall under the category of being an it bag, a bag very much of the moment. And the first and most obvious bag within that category is the Chloe Faye. So the Chloe Faye, I bought this in 2015 and it was a huge bag at the time. Chloe are very good at doing it bags, and I've got some more coming up. And don't get me wrong, I adored this bag. It was a very big deal for me to make such a high value purchase, and I genuinely loved it. But this bag was very much a learning curve for me. The colour that I bought, if I remember correctly, was called Misty Beige. Doesn't it just sound magical? And it was a really sort of nice peachy neutral. Not a colour that I would probably wear now because it was a bit too peachy for my liking now. I prefer sort of more beigey neutrals. But it was a very light coloured bag. And if you all remember, the flap of the Chloe Faye was nubuck, not suede, nubuck. So in terms of practicality, this bag scored a 0, at least in this colour. I had it for about 3 weeks, and then I went on our mini moon. So we went to Budapest and Venice. And by the time I came back, we were away for I think 7 or 8 days, that bag was ruined, or the nubuck flap on that bag was ruined. Now I tried everything to clean this bag and it just would not come up. I got it to a certain level, but it just wouldn't come up looking like how I wanted it to. And I remember feeling devastated over the state of this bag. So of course, I wore it a few more times, but naturally it kind of just got forgotten. I did eventually buy a second Chloe Faye, and granted it was in a much more practical colour. It was like a dark khaki colour. That was so much more practical, but again, it was still an it bag. So after maybe a couple of years, that was a bag that gradually started to get used less and less. And I still look back at that bag and I think, do you know what, it was quite a nice looking bag. I still look at it very fondly, but both of those bags did get sold because, as with all It bags, they had their day. I also had 3 more Chloe It bags, the Tess, the Nile and the Drew, all very similar in shape and size, and these weren't all bought at the same time either. This has been literally since 2015 up until this point. So all of these bags were quite small. They were all something that you could wear crossbody, apart from, I think, the Nile, which had a little bracelet sort of attachment on it. So that was very impractical. I don't know why that bag was ever in my collection. But all of these bags essentially became bags that once I started YouTube, they became a little bit redundant, because if we go back to sort of my early days in YouTube, I used to vlog a lot. So my little vlogging camera, whilst it was very compact, I needed to take that everywhere with me. And those smaller bags just became bags that were pretty much useless for my day-to-day use. And as well, as I've said, they were It bags. So they came and they went. They were all bags that eventually got sold. I also think that Chloe is a brand that does a lot of hardware, and obviously now I am much more of a minimalist, so I don't have a lot of hardware on bags. Pretty much all of those bags had some kind of jingly hardware. It was bold, it made a noise when you moved, and that is one thing that now I don't go for. The Givenchy Antigona, I had 2 of these, and the first one was slightly larger. I think it was the medium size. This was my first ever pre-loved luxury bag. So this is when I discovered Vestiaire. And that was, again, another catalyst to a spiralling staircase of pre-loved purchases. Some good and some not so good. So the Givenchy Antigona, it was practical, it was spacey and roomy inside. It was quite a large bag. I found it easy to wear. I wore that bag so much. And it had quite a smooth leather to it, but it stayed in pretty good condition, to be honest with you, for the amount of times that I wore it. But of course, Givenchy was another brand that had their moment of being, I suppose, a bit of a resurgence of Givenchy. And with Kanye West and Kim Kardashian, they kind of brought it back, and they had the whole Rottweiler thing and then the logos, and it was just another brand, and another bag rather, that had its moment and then quickly faded away. So next is the Gucci Dionysus. I have very fond memories of this bag, even though I sold it. Memories, sell them on. But this was a bag that Simon actually bought me, and he bought me this at Heathrow Airport before we went away on our big proper honeymoon. We were away for 6 weeks. So that bag I used every single day on our honeymoon, which is why our entire road trip album of photos is just me and my Gucci Dionysus, just living my best life. And that bag was used a lot. So don't get me wrong, it was still a bag that really got its wear. It wasn't something that just stayed in my wardrobe and was barely worn. I did get a lot of wear out of it. But again, it was another bag that became an it thing. It was actually a very practical bag because of the monogrammed canvas. You couldn't see dirt on it very much. It was quite easy to clean. So it was one of the bags that I had learnt from the Chloe Faye was something that was a lot more practical. But it still had its day and then became a bag that was seen as past season or was seen as not in anymore. And then finally, the Gucci Marmont. I see this bag, or at least variations of this bag, any collections from within the Marmont collection with that sort of slightly more rounded GG logo and the leather. And of course they come in lots of different colours. I assume it's still in production. I actually don't know. I haven't been on the Gucci website or in a Gucci store for a good few years now, but I do still see that bag a lot. But it was another bag that kind of came and had its moment, and those GGs were large, which provides me a bit of a segue onto my next category, which is like logo mania. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to get rid of that bag. Whilst again, I used it a lot. It was practical. It was a good size. it still looked pretty much as good as new when I sold it. But it was one of those bags that was very in your face with the logo. And I remember I even had I don't want to say matching belt, but I had a Marmont belt as well with those 2 GGs on it, but it was in tan leather. And that was at a point where I really liked logos. I liked to be able to show off the fact that this bag was a luxury brand. It was Gucci. You knew that from seeing these 2 massive GGs. And that couldn't be further away from where I am now, where I now go for more subtle branding, if branding at all. Brands that are minuscule, maybe they're embossed and they're super, super tiny. So things have changed a lot. And that does take me on to my next category, which is heavily branded bags, logo mania, and logos everywhere. Okay, so first of all, I had the Saint Laurent or Yves Saint Laurent YSL Cassandra bag, I think it was called. It was black, sort of mock croc or croc embossed leather. It was definitely more of an evening bag. And just thinking about it now, that bag costs so much money. And I think this is one of the bags that I rarely used because it was more of an evening bag. I think I probably used it about 6 or 7 times. Back in the days when I used to go to all the blogger events and that kind of thing, it was something that got, whipped out at those times. And then as I kind of got towards 2018, 2019, I stopped going to events, or I started going less and less to events because I just didn't enjoy them. And so bags like that became bags that were rarely used. Another one was a little Gucci crossbody, and I can't remember the name of it, but I'm tempted to say camera bag. Now, the branding on this was large, but it was stitched, so it was a little bit more subtle because it blended in with the bag, but nonetheless, the GGs were still huge on this bag. Good little bag, very practical because it was a crossbody. It was often a bag that I would take to Disney with me because I could wear it crossbody and I could fit my camera in there as well, my vlogging camera. But again, very, very heavy on the logos. I had a tan Saint Laurent bag, which had quite a big gold Y, bit of gold hardware on it. This was a sort of boxy tote bag. Can't remember the name of it, but that I bought from Bicester Village. And again, the Y on that, and actually the hardware on that was really brassy as well. So that was another thing that is something that I just don't tend to go for now, is really sort of brassy and just a lot of hardware. Going back to the Chloe bags, I just tend to stay away from lots of hardware. Then I had 2 vintage bags. The vintage Fendi Baguette Mama. I'm trying to remember all this stuff from memory is like just digging back through the archives. And then the Louis Vuitton Croissant bag. And I think that might have been in the large size. So these bags, 2 bags very similar because it was a monogrammed logo. So the Fendi having the FF all over it, Louis Vuitton being the very classic brown monogram. And you know what? Both of these bags are still very classic, I think. The Fendi Baguette Mama has, or the Fendi Baguette in general, has had a resurgence a couple of times over the last few years. Louis Vuitton is always a classic. But it was just those in-your-face logos that eventually were, I suppose, a bit of a turn-off for me. Right, on to my next category, which is impulse purchases / purchases that I made on a bit of a whim. The first of which was a Celine suede, it was tan suede, and I think it was just called luggage bag. It was the ones that had the flaps out the side and then the handle. This had no shoulder strap, so it was really impractical. I did buy it pre-loved. I bought it on Vestiaire. It was tan suede. Why? I just want to go back in time and shake myself and say, you learnt from the Faye. Why did you buy this bag? Because it was so impractical. However, because I'd learnt from the experience with the Chloe Faye, that meant that I rarely used this bag because I was so scared of damaging it. So it ended up being, because it was quite large, all made of suede bar, I think, the handles. It just ended up being a bag that I rarely used. There was also a Balenciaga city bag. I bought this from Bicester Village and I bought it in navy. I bought it with good intentions. I thought navy would be a colour that would work really well in my wardrobe. In reality, it did not. I think if I'd have bought black, I'd have worn that bag so much more. I ended up wearing that bag maybe 3 times, and then I kept hold of it for a few years and then sold it. The hardware on that bag was also very, very shiny. I think this is something that often happens in Bicester. Sometimes there are bags which are made at a slightly lower quality, or they at least look a little bit different. The bags that don't sell in proper big retail stores end up going to Bicester. So I think the hardware on this, which was very shiny, very brassy, and dare I say a bit tacky, was also something that eventually became a turn off for me. The next category is bags that just weren't used. And this is probably one of the biggest reasons why I decide to cull anything from my wardrobe in general, not just bags. And this category kind of houses a few bags in there from some of the previous categories, and also just bags that maybe didn't pan out being how I thought they would be. So a bag that I really lusted after and maybe had on my wish list and thought about, but in reality just wasn't quite what I expected. So I'm going to start off with the Gucci Horsebit Hobo. This was a bag that I had lusted after when I was in my late teens, early 20s, back when Newlyweds, the MTV show with Jessica Simpson and Nick from 98 Degrees, back when that was a huge thing. Jessica Simpson in that show had so many of these bags, and I remember wanting one so badly. And back when I was watching that show, there is no way I could have ever afforded one of these bags. So this was a bag that I bought pre-loved. It was a bag that kind of I needed to buy to satisfy an urge from when I was younger, to kind of just feed the early 20-year-old in me. And I bought it in quite a deep tan leather, which was my favourite colour from way back when. This bag was so impractical, don't get me wrong, beautiful bag, so impractical. The strap on it was very short, so you could fit it on your shoulder, but there wasn't a lot of space, like underneath, it felt very cramped. Also, it was very heavy. There was a lot of leather on that bag, and also the shoulder strap just did not feel comfortable because it had this big chunky, it was almost like a full-size horse bit on the shoulder. So there's lots of elements of that bag which wouldn't work for me now. Chunky hardware being one. It did have minimal branding. There was no big Gucci logo on it, which is something that I appreciate. But it just wasn't a bag that, as I mentioned a minute ago, didn't pan out in reality. Another bag along similar lines was the little tan suede, and I don't remember what this was called, but it was a Gucci. Again, it had the horse bit on it, and it was a little crossbody bag. I had seen that bag so many years ago, and I remember I'd been on the hunt for it for maybe 1 or 2 years. And it was another bag that I bought pre-loved, but again, it was entirely suede. And I think I've referenced this in some of my more recent wish list videos. And it's something that I have to keep reminding myself about, because I see suede and I just think that is beautiful. Because let's face it, it does look beautiful. But it's so impractical. I think unless you're buying it in a darker colour, like a black or a chocolatey brown or something, or a dark khaki, it's so impractical. You have to be so careful with it. It's not something, even with protector, that you should be wearing out in the rain because you can damage it. And again, this was just another bag like that Celine luggage that fit into the category of I was so scared of ruining it that I barely used it. Another bag from my earlier years was a red Saint Laurent tote. This had quite minimal branding and it was just a very basic tote bag. So in theory, tick, tick, tick. This would still be a bag that I would have in my collection now if it hadn't have been red. You only have to take one look at my Instagram and any of my videos to see that I don't wear red. I might wear a red lip at Christmas, but other than that, I do not wear red, with the exception of burgundy, but it's not bright, bright red. So that was just something that I never wore past a certain point when I started being a little bit more minimal and neutral with my colours. If I'd have bought that in black, I'd still have it now. Now, Old Celine from the Phoebe era is a brand and era that I love. A lot of my Celine bags that I've got in my current collection are from that era. But one purchase that I made, I bought it pre-loved and I bought it from a pop-up at Bicester Village, was the Celine Edge. It was a bag that I'd had again on my wish list, but in reality, the shape of it, the boxiness of it, the handle strap scenario just didn't end up panning out for me. It was also a very dark navy, which, although it was a different colour to that navy Balenciaga city bag that I'd bought, again, for some reason, navy clothing works so well for me, but this bag just did not. It was quite limiting in terms of how and when I could use it, and yeah, just practicality wise, it didn't pan out for me. And the same applies to the black, I think it was called Ava Wandler tote bag. It was too boxy, too structured, too large for sort of day-to-day use. I just found it a bit too cumbersome. It also had a very smooth, dare I say, slightly shiny leather, which in a similar way to suede, I was just petrified of damaging. So that was another bag that was rarely used, partly because of practicality and partly because of fear. And then finally, I've forgotten the name of this. I literally had it on the tip of my tongue a second ago, but it was a little Celine, and it was new Celine, but a monogrammed, like with the Triomphe monogram, little crossbody bag. Almost like a saddle bag because it had a flap on the front of it. Folco? Yes, Folco, the Celine Folco. It just came to me. That bag was something that I actually bought on a bit of a whim. And I bought that bag kind of as an alternative to Louis Vuitton, because aside from the vintage croissant that I had, I'd never bought into the Louis Vuitton monogram. And I think I preferred Celine always as a brand. It just fit in more with my style. But this bag, it was quite small, and it was perfect for kind of city wear where you needed something crossbody and it was just really convenient. But again, it was almost too small to fit in some of the things that I needed. I need something, if I'm going to go for a small bag, I need something like my Loewe puzzle, which for me is the perfect size small bag that can be worn crossbody. Or my slouchy banana bag from the Row. That again for me, a little bit larger, but is more of the size that I need for a crossbody. Now on to my final category, which is Chanel. It deserves its own category. And the reason for that is because this is probably, or these bags that I had within my Chanel collection, if we're going to call it that, were the bags that I have been most frequently asked about when it comes to bags that I no longer have in my bag collection. So I had 5 Chanel bags in my Chanel collection, 4 of which were vintage, 1 of which was bought new, and it was a Chanel wallet on a chain that I bought at Heathrow Airport, and I bought this when I was en route to my first Like to Know It, or back in the day it was called Reward Style Conference in Texas. Again, I'm going to go back to my point about wanting bags that were a bit of a status symbol. I think I bought that bag, I'm tempted to say 2016 or 2017. I can't remember when that conference was from memory, but it was definitely back at the point where I had been pulled in and sucked in by the, needing to show off luxury brands situation. So it was a whim purchase. I had never wanted that wallet on a chain, never had any desire to own that bag. Fortunately, I was able to sell it for the exact amount that I bought it, so I didn't lose any money on that. And that brings me to the positive about Chanel, because the 4 vintage bags I actually still own. They have not been sold yet, they're just not part of my used bag collection. Because with Chanel, even with vintage, or sometimes especially with vintage, they can appreciate in value. Chanel vintage had a bit of a resurgence a good few years ago, and the prices absolutely shot up on the pre-love market. So Simon and I kind of see those 4 vintage Chanel bags, one of which was a backpack, one of which was a large tote bag with a stitched CC logo on it, and then I had 2 classic flaps, different sizes. We see those 4 bags as a bit of an investment. So they're currently kept elsewhere in a secure storage unit, and eventually they will be sold, hopefully when there's another sort of price rise in Chanel vintage. And that brings us to the end of today's video. I hope I have addressed any of your questions. If there's anything that I missed, please do head down to the comments section and ask away, and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. But for now, that is it from me. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you next time.